Welcome to Worth Coin. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? A 2021 cent USA coin may look like the most ordinary piece of money imaginable, something you could easily overlook, drop into a jar, or spend without a second thought. Yet stories surrounding extraordinary examples of modern cents have collectors asking a much bigger question. Could a seemingly normal coin hide a spectacular fortune? Some online claims have placed an unbelievable figure as high as $20 million on an exceptionally rare example. But before you believe any headline, there is a very important mystery to solve. What would actually have to make a modern cent extraordinary enough to command serious collector attention? Stay with me because we are going to examine the history, design, minting process, possible errors, condition clues, and the details that could separate an ordinary example from something genuinely fascinating. And near the end, I'll also remind you about two other coins waiting in this series, because the next discoveries become even more mysterious without revealing their values just yet. First, let's make one thing absolutely clear. A regular 2021 cent coin is not automatically worth millions, and there is no established public auction record proving that an ordinary 2020 cent sold for $20 million. The spectacular $20 million figure associated with this story should therefore be treated as an unverified or hypothetical top-end claim rather than a confirmed market price. And that distinction matters enormously in coin collecting, because the difference between a normal coin and a truly rare coin is usually hidden in the details. So why does this particular year attract attention? The 2020 Lincoln cent belongs to one of the longest-running coin traditions in American history, carrying the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the Union Shield design on the reverse. The Lincoln cent has been part of American commerce for generations, and by 2020, billions of cents had entered circulation over the years. That enormous production is exactly what makes the discovery of a genuinely unusual specimen so exciting. When a coin is produced in massive numbers, collectors do not usually chase every example. Instead, they search for something that breaks the pattern. It might be an unusual minting error, an unexpected strike characteristic, a dramatic die problem, a wrong planchet situation, a major doubled design, an unusual off-center strike, a transitional composition issue, or an exceptionally preserved specimen with characteristics that deserve professional examination. And this is where the 2020 cent becomes much more interesting than it first appears. Imagine opening a jar of old change and seeing several cents sitting together. To the untrained eye, they might all look almost identical. But a specialist could examine the lettering, Lincoln's portrait, the date, the mint mark area, the rim, the edge, the surfaces, and the relationship between the obverse and reverse designs, searching for anything that falls outside the expected manufacturing standard. Modern coin production is incredibly precise, but precision does not mean perfection. Coins move through enormous production systems involving blank preparation, striking, die alignment, mechanical pressure, inspection, counting, packaging, and distribution. A tiny problem at one stage can sometimes leave a visible mark on a finished coin. That is the beginning of the error coin story. Consider an off-center strike. If a blank does not sit correctly between the dies when the press strikes, the resulting coin can show part of the design missing from one side, while leaving an unusually broad area of blank surface elsewhere. Minor examples may have limited collector interest, but dramatic errors can become highly desirable because they are visually obvious and much harder to encounter. Now imagine a double strike. If a coin is struck and then receives another strike in a slightly different position, parts of the design can appear shifted, overlapping, or duplicated. A dramatic example can be instantly eye-catching. But here is the important warning. Not every apparent doubling is a valuable double die, and not every blurry letter is evidence of a rare mint error. Mechanical damage, machine doubling, die wear, polishing, scratches, and post-mint damage can create misleading appearances. That is why serious collectors learn to distinguish genuine mint-made characteristics from damage that happened after the coin left the mint. Another possibility is a wrong planchet error, one of the categories that can create enormous excitement when properly authenticated. A planchet is essentially the prepared metal disc that becomes a coin when struck. If the wrong blank somehow enters a production line, the finished coin may have an unusual weight, color, thickness, diameter, or appearance. These errors are rare because multiple manufacturing controls normally prevent such mistakes. If you ever encounter a modern cent that looks dramatically different from its expected specifications, do not immediately assume you have found a fortune, but do pay attention. Measure it carefully, avoid cleaning it, and consider professional authentication. The same principle applies to unusual coloration. A 2020 cent can display natural toning, environmental discoloration, chemical alteration, heat damage, or other surface changes. A strange color alone does not prove rarity. Collectors want to know whether the appearance originated at the mint or developed afterward. That distinction can completely change the significance of a coin. Now let's talk about condition, because even when there is no spectacular error, preservation can make a major difference in the collecting world. A coin that has spent years circulating through pockets, vending machines, drawers, and cash registers can acquire scratches, dents, stains, rim damage, and wear. A coin that escaped circulation and remained sharply preserved may look dramatically different. Collectors often use grading systems to describe preservation, and professional grading services can encapsulate and authenticate coins when appropriate. But remember, a high grade does not automatically transform an ordinary modern cent into a multi-million-dollar rarity. Rarity, demand, condition, authenticity, and distinctive characteristics all matter. This is why sensational online claims should always be approached carefully. If someone tells you that every 2020 penny is worth millions, that is not responsible numismatic advice. Instead, the real opportunity is learning how to identify what makes a particular specimen different. And that brings us to one of the most exciting parts of searching through your own coins. The possibility that the important clue may be hiding in plain sight. Imagine finding a 2020 cent where the design appears shifted. You turn it over and notice something unusual about the rim. You place it on a scale, and the weight does not match what you expected. Suddenly, that ordinary-looking coin becomes a question rather than an answer. Is it damage? Is it a genuine mint error? Is it simply a manufacturing variation? Or could it be something that deserves expert attention? That uncertainty is exactly what makes coin hunting addictive. Every coin becomes a tiny investigation. And if you are checking your collection right now, this is the moment to slow down rather than rush. Look at the date. Examine the lettering. Study the rim. Compare the coin with another example from the same year. Check whether the design is centered correctly. Look for unusual doubling, missing details, cracks, clips, broad strikes, or other characteristics that appear genuinely connected to the minting process. But do not clean the coin. This is one of the biggest mistakes inexperienced collectors make. A harsh cleaning can destroy original surfaces and potentially reduce collector interest. Leave the coin exactly as you found it until you understand what you are dealing with. Now, there is another fascinating element to the 2020 cent. Its place in a period when American coin production and everyday commerce were experiencing major changes. Coins are more than pieces of metal. They are records of economic life, technology, design, and history. Every cent that survives becomes a tiny artifact of its time. That does not mean every example is rare, but it does mean that collectors are preserving pieces of ordinary American life. Think about where a particular cent might have traveled. It could have passed through a grocery store, a gas station, a vending machine, a family coin jar, or someone's pocket. A coin that looks completely ordinary today may have already traveled farther than you imagine. And when an unusual mint error appears among millions of normal coins, its story becomes even more compelling. This is why collectors chase errors, not simply because of money, but because an error can reveal something about how the coin was made. It is evidence of a moment when an extremely controlled process did something unexpected. Now let's return to that astonishing $20 million claim. Could a normal 2021 cent coin simply be worth $20 million? No credible basis exists for saying that. A genuine multi-million-dollar valuation would require extraordinary evidence, and a coin advertised at such a figure would need independent authentication, documented provenance, strong market interest, incredible auction, or appraisal evidence. The most important lesson is therefore not to believe the number first. It is to investigate the coin first. The value comes from the evidence, not the headline. If you have a 2020 cent with a strange feature, photograph both sides under good lighting, record its weight and measurements without altering it, compare it with normal examples, and seek an opinion from an established numismatic expert or professional grading service if the characteristics appear significant. Do not rely solely on social media posts or sensational videos. And here is something even more exciting. The mystery does not end with this modern cent. Remember, I told you there are more coins coming in this series, and I am deliberately not revealing their values yet. One of the upcoming coins comes from a completely different era, and its story takes us into another fascinating chapter of American coinage. Another one may look just as ordinary at first glance, but the details collectors search for can completely change the conversation. So if you enjoy the thrill of discovering what most people overlook, you absolutely want to stay with this series. Before we move forward, take another look at your own change. How many cents have you ignored simply because they looked ordinary? How many have you dropped into a jar without checking the date, mint mark, strike, or surfaces? The truth is, most will be ordinary, and that is perfectly normal. But the entire hobby is built around finding the exceptions. A single unusual characteristic can turn an everyday object into a fascinating numismatic investigation. And if you thought the story of the 2020 cent was interesting, wait until we move to the next coin, because the upcoming example takes us into an entirely different period of American coin collecting, where production details, rarity, and collector demand create a completely different mystery. I am not going to reveal its value yet, because the fun is in discovering why collectors care about it. So keep that curiosity alive. The next coin could have a story hiding behind a tiny detail that most people would never notice. For now, remember the key lesson from this 2021 cent. Do not judge a coin simply by its face value, and do not believe in extraordinary valuation without extraordinary evidence. The real treasure is knowing what to look for. A genuine mint error, an unusual planchet, a dramatic strike, exceptional preservation, or another authenticated rarity can make a coin fascinating and potentially valuable, while an ordinary coin remains exactly that, ordinary. So check your cents carefully, protect them from damage, and if you discover something truly unusual, have it examined by someone qualified before making any claims about its value. And as we close this first chapter, remember that somewhere in a collection, a coin jar, an old drawer, or a forgotten box, another little piece of American history may be waiting to be noticed. The question is not whether every coin is a fortune. The question is whether you know how to recognize the one that deserves a second look. And when you are ready for the next chapter, stay with me, because the next coin in our journey has a completely different story, a different generation, and a new mystery for us to uncover. And I promise, we will leave its most intriguing secrets hidden until the right moment. Next, 1973 P1 cent. And now the mystery takes a dramatic turn, because we are leaving the modern era behind and stepping into a completely different chapter of American coinage. What if an ordinary-looking cent from decades ago had survived circulation with a tiny manufacturing mistake that transformed it into a collector's dream? A 1973 P1 cent may appear familiar, but the real excitement begins when you stop looking at the coin as money and start examining it as evidence. Some sensational claims have placed astonishing figures as high as $88 million around extraordinary examples. But before believing any headline, there is a much more important question. What genuine characteristics could make a 1973 P cent exceptionally desirable? Stay with me all the way through this story, because we are going to uncover the history of this coin, explore the errors and varieties collectors actually look for, explain why condition matters, and examine the clues that could separate an ordinary survivor from a truly remarkable numismatic discovery. And remember, there is still another coin waiting after this one, with another mystery that I am keeping completely secret for now. First, let's address the headline number honestly. There is no established public evidence that an ordinary 1973 P Lincoln cent sold for $88 million. That figure should be treated as an unverified sensational claim, not a confirmed market value. In serious coin collecting, extraordinary prices require extraordinary proof. Auction records, professional authentication, documented provenance, rarity, condition, and genuine collector demand all have to support the story. So instead of chasing a number, let's chase the evidence. The 1973 P cent belongs to the classic Lincoln Memorial era, a period when the familiar memorial reverse was still appearing on American 1-cent coins. The Philadelphia Mint produced enormous quantities of cents for everyday commerce, which means millions upon millions of examples entered circulation. That may sound like bad news for collectors, but it creates an interesting paradox. The more ordinary coins that were produced, the more fascinating it becomes when one example contains a legitimate feature that separates it from the crowd. Imagine opening an old container of coins and finding a cent from the early 1970s. It may have scratches, discoloration, and circulation wear. You might think there is nothing special about it. But then you tilt it beneath a light and notice something strange around the lettering. Perhaps the date appears unusual. Perhaps the rim seems incomplete. Maybe part of the design appears shifted. You turn the coin over and discover another characteristic that does not match the normal examples you have seen. Suddenly, the coin is no longer just a penny. It is a mystery. That is exactly the feeling that keeps collectors searching. The 1973 P cent was produced during a fascinating period in U.S. mint history. Philadelphia coins of this era generally did not carry a mint mark. So when collectors refer to a 1973 P cent, the P identifies Philadelphia even though the coin itself normally does not display a P mint mark. This is an important point for beginners, because the absence of a mint mark on a Philadelphia cent from this period is not automatically an error. In fact, it is expected. That is why understanding the normal design is the first step toward recognizing the abnormal. On the obverse, Abraham Lincoln faces right, surrounded by the familiar inscriptions associated with the Lincoln cent. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial dominates the design, with inscriptions identifying the denomination and the United States. Every tiny detail provides an opportunity for comparison. Serious collectors do not simply ask, "Does this coin look old?" They ask, "Does this coin look different from what this issue should normally look like?" That question changes everything. One of the first areas to inspect is the date. Damage can distort numbers, but genuine die varieties or striking anomalies can create unusual characteristics that repeat across multiple coins struck from the same die. This is where the difference between an interesting-looking coin and a potentially important coin becomes critical. A genuine doubled die, for example, results from a die-making process that creates a doubled design element on the die itself. The doubling can appear in letters, numbers, or other parts of the design. It is not the same thing as a coin simply being struck twice or damaged after leaving the mint. Machine doubling can produce flattened or shelf-like appearances that beginners sometimes mistake for valuable doubled dies. Learning this distinction is one of the most useful skills a collector can develop. Now consider die cracks. As dies are repeatedly used under enormous pressure, they can develop cracks. When a crack becomes part of the striking surface, it can leave a raised line or irregular feature on the coin struck afterward. Some die cracks are small and common. Others can be dramatic. A large, clearly visible die break can become an attractive collectible feature, particularly when it creates a memorable pattern across the coin. But again, not every crack-like line is a mint error. Scratches are usually incuse, meaning they cut into the surface, while many die-related features can appear raised. The direction, shape, and relationship to the design can help determine what you are seeing. Another category collectors watch for is the clipped planchet. This occurs when a blank is improperly punched from the metal strip, leaving an unusual curved or straight missing section along the edge. A genuine clip can often be recognized by specific characteristics around the affected area. However, damage caused by tools or circulation can mimic clips, so authentication is important when the feature appears significant. Off-center strikes are another visually dramatic possibility. If the blank shifts during striking, the design can land away from its normal position. Minor offsets may not be especially important, but dramatic off-center strikes can attract considerable collector interest. The key is that the feature must originate during minting rather than after the coin entered circulation. Imagine finding a 1973 cent with a substantial portion of the design shifted toward the edge. You might immediately think you have discovered something extraordinary. But before celebrating, you would want to inspect the rim, metal flow, strike characteristics, and overall shape. Is the missing area consistent with an off-center strike? Is there evidence of post-mint damage? Does the edge make sense for a struck coin? Those questions turn excitement into proper numismatic investigation. Then there are broad strikes, where a coin is struck without the normal collar surrounding it. This can cause the coin to spread beyond its expected shape while retaining portions of the design. Broad strikes can be fascinating because they show how the collar influences the final form of a coin. A genuine broad strike is very different from a coin that was mechanically flattened or damaged after leaving the mint. Once again, the story is hidden in the details. One of the most exciting possibilities collectors consider with older cents is a wrong planchet error. If a blank intended for another denomination or composition somehow enters the wrong production stream, the resulting coin can display unusual weight, dimensions, color, or thickness. A legitimate wrong planchet error can be rare because the mint normally has systems designed to prevent such mistakes. If you find a 1973 cent that seems dramatically different from a normal example, weighing it can be a useful first step. But never alter the coin to test your theory. Do not bend it, cut it, scratch it, polish it, or expose it to chemicals. A potentially interesting coin can be permanently damaged by an amateur experiment. Professional examination is always safer. Now let's talk about the biggest enemy of value, cleaning. Many people find an old cent and think it would look better if they scrubbed away the dark surface. Unfortunately, cleaning can leave scratches, unnatural brightness, and altered surfaces that collectors generally dislike. Original surfaces are important. Even if a coin is dirty, leave it alone until you understand what it is. A coin's appearance is part of its history, and aggressive cleaning can erase evidence that might otherwise help an expert evaluate it. Condition is another major factor. The 1970s were decades ago, and many cents from this era spent years circulating. They were handled by millions of people, dropped onto hard surfaces, exposed to moisture, and mixed with other coins. Finding a sharply preserved example can therefore be much more interesting than finding a heavily worn one. But once again, condition alone does not create a multi-million-dollar coin. A high-grade common coin can be desirable without being extraordinarily valuable. The strongest combinations usually involve rarity plus condition plus demand. Think about it this way. If 10 million people own something, it is difficult for one example to command an enormous price simply because it is old. But if only a handful of examples possess a documented and highly desirable error, the situation changes. Scarcity becomes meaningful. Collectors begin competing for ownership. Auctions can create excitement. Provenance can strengthen confidence. And a coin with an extraordinary story can become far more memorable than an ordinary piece of pocket change. This is why the search for errors is so popular. You are not simply searching for an expensive object. You are searching for something that escaped the normal production pattern. You are looking for the exception. And sometimes the exception is surprisingly subtle. A tiny doubled letter, a distinctive die crack, an unusual rim, a missing design element, or a strange planchet can become the clue that sends a collector searching through reference books and auction archives. Now imagine the scene. Someone inherits a box of coins from a family member. They are sorting through it casually when they notice a 1973 cent that seems different. They set it aside. Later, they compare it with another coin and notice a possible doubling. They take photographs. They weigh it. They ask experienced collectors. Eventually, the coin is sent to a professional service. That moment of waiting can be thrilling because the answer could confirm the feature or reveal that what looked rare was simply damage. This is the reality of coin collecting. Sometimes the treasure is genuine. Sometimes the treasure is the knowledge you gain from discovering why a coin is not rare. Either way, you become a better collector. And that brings us back to the sensational $88 million claim. Could an ordinary 1973 cent be worth $88 million? There is no credible basis to say that. A genuine sale at that level would require extraordinary documentation and would be one of the most important events in the numismatic market. So if you see a social media post claiming that every 1973 penny is worth a fortune, be skeptical. Instead, ask what specific coin is being discussed. What is its exact error? Has it been authenticated? Is there a documented auction result? What condition is it in? Does the claimed price reflect a real sale or merely an asking price? These questions protect collectors from exaggerated claims and help separate genuine numismatic discoveries from internet hype. And if you are searching your own coins, here is a simple routine. Start with the date. Check the mint mark situation. Examine both sides under good lighting. Inspect the rim. Compare suspicious features with normal examples. And weigh the coin only if necessary. Keep your coin in its original condition. Photograph it. Document what you see. Then seek an expert opinion if the characteristics appear unusual. Do not assume that every odd-looking coin is valuable, but do not throw away a genuinely unusual one simply because it looks old and dirty. The most exciting discoveries often begin with one simple decision. Let me take a closer look. And now, before we leave this 1973 cent behind, I want you to remember something because it will matter when we reach the final parts of this journey. We have already seen how a modern cent can become the subject of sensational claims, and now we have stepped backward into the classic Lincoln Memorial era. But the next coin takes us into another story entirely. I am not going to reveal its value, because that would destroy the suspense, but I will tell you this. The next chapter has another reason for collectors to pay attention, and the clue may be much easier to miss than you think. So if you have coins stored in a drawer, inherited collections, old jars, or boxes in the attic, this is your reminder to slow down. You never know what you are looking at until you compare it against what a normal example should look like. And if you thought the mystery surrounding this 1973 cent was fascinating, do not leave yet, because the next coin is waiting to take us even deeper into the world of unusual American cents. We will examine what makes it different, what collectors search for, and why a seemingly insignificant detail can completely change the conversation. Again, I am keeping its value hidden for now, because the real question is not how much, but why. Why would collectors chase one example while ignoring thousands of others? Why would a tiny manufacturing characteristic matter? And how can you tell whether an unusual feature is real or simply damage? Those are the questions that turn coin collecting into detective work. So keep your eyes open, keep your old coins untouched, and most importantly, never judge a coin by its face value alone. The 1973 1 cent may have been made for everyday commerce, but decades later, it can still tell us something remarkable about American manufacturing, collecting, and the strange imperfections that occasionally escape even highly controlled minting processes. And now the next chapter is approaching. The year will change, the clues will change, and the mystery will deepen, but the rule remains the same. Examine first, verify second, and only then talk about value. Because somewhere among